Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Sam from the Barrington Area Library. I'm the Community Engagement Librarian. So that means I get to work for the benefit of our local nonprofits and aside our local nonprofits. And today's program is one that I'm putting on with one of my favorite nonprofits to work with, Go Green Barrington. So Jennifer Lucas is with us from Go Green. So I will let her tell us a little bit about that organization and about our presenter tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Again, my name is Jennifer Lucas, and I represent Go Green Barrington. We're a community organization. We try to do environmental programs and projects that help the environment and raise awareness. So see more at gogreenbarrington.org. And a few years ago, Go Green Barrington partnered with the Barrington Area Library to sponsor a film with the One Earth Film Festival. The film was titled River Blue, and it was all about the harm to the environment from the jeans industry. And we had a great turnout, and as people were leaving, what should we do? They would ask us, what should we do? Where should we buy our clothes? Tell us more. And it was great. The interest was really strong. And the great news is the interest has even grown stronger. We have over 100 people registered tonight. Some will join us live and some want the recording, but we're very excited about the presentation and the turnout. Tonight's speaker is Amanda McCarty. Amanda uses the pronouns she, they. Amanda wanted to be an art teacher, but ended up with a career in fashion. I'm sure we'll learn more tonight. Amanda has 20 years of experience in buying, product development, merchandising, and planning with many of our iconic brands. Amanda works as a consultant and content creator. And I was very fortunate to hear Amanda about a year ago, so I'm extra excited for tonight. And just a reminder that Amanda does not live in the Chicago suburbs, so keep that in mind as you think of your questions. But other than that, let's get started with the program. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, at least virtually with you tonight. Sam is going to be driving the deck tonight, which does give me a little bit of anxiety because I have major control issues in Zoom, but we were having some technical difficulties. So Sam, if you want to get the presentation up on the screen, we'll get rolling. All right, so tonight we're going to talk all about, and I'm going to preface this by saying we have an hour. I could probably talk to you for 10 hours, 50 hours, 100 hours about this, and we would not have exhausted this topic at all. We still wouldn't have all the answers. I'm going to try to give you a more condensed version tonight. This deck is filled with so much information. I'm not going to read it aloud to you, but we are going to send you a PDF copy of this afterwards for your reference. There's a lot of great additional reading in there. There are sources, all kinds of great things that you can review and think about, because we're all on this journey together to do better, especially when it comes to our clothing. And sometimes you need to just sit down and absorb the information a few times before you can really hit that point where you're ready to say okay, today is the day I'm going to start making change. I have worked in the fashion industry my entire adult life. I currently don't, which is great, actually. Something that I used to always say when people would sort of downplay my career and say oh, you just go shopping for a living, I would say, it's not just clothes. What I do is more than just clothes. And I have found that even more applicable in this new phase of my life, where I educate people about the impact of our clothes and our consumption. So it's a great catchphrase. I feel like that's what my tombstone is going to stay someday. It's more than just clothes. And so tonight we're going to talk about why your clothes matter. Let's move on to the next slide. I think I got a really great introduction there, but just in case you were wondering why I, Amanda McCarty, feel as if I can talk to you about all this stuff. As Jennifer mentioned, I have had a pretty lengthy career working for some of the most iconic millennial fast fashion brands. If you've gone shopping in the past 20 years, chances are very high that you bought something that I developed or bought or merchandised. And in 2020, I was working for the rental brand under a large fast fashion umbrella. And I lost my job at the beginning of the pandemic. It was very devastating for my family. We had no health insurance, no severance, no future career on the horizon for me. And it made me, well, first I played The Sims for about 4 to 6 weeks around the clock. If I wasn't crying, it was Sims and crying. And then I began to have this sort of revelation, like, I don't think a lot of people know what's happening behind the scenes with clothing. And I know a lot of it, but I know there's even more to learn about it. And it started my own odyssey of getting to the bottom of all of it, kind of alongside all the people who listen to my podcast Clotheshorse, participate on our online community. And so I've been on the journey as well, but I come to it with at least, I don't know, a little leg up because I've worked in the industry and I see how these pieces fit together. Let's move on to the next slide. So let's just get down to brass tacks here. There are too many clothes in this world. Go to a thrift store tomorrow, or even look at the donation bins in the parking lot of the Goodwill, or here we have them in Target. Just go see the clothes that are just everywhere. For many of us, it could be as simple as walking into our bedrooms and opening our closet doors. The fashion industry produces about 150 billion, that's with a B, billion garments every year. And about 30% of those 150 billion garments, that's 45 billion if you don't have a calculator in your hand like I usually do, those are never sold. A person never puts them on their bodies. They are destroyed, they're burned. Occasionally they are donated, but honestly, 45 billion pieces of clothing on top of all the other clothing that we're turning and donating in our own lives, it's too much for this world. And a number, this slide is filled with tons of statistics I'd love you to take a look at, but the number that always kind of stops people in their tracks and didn't shock me the first time I heard it, but when I really sit down with it, it like kind of hurts me a little bit here, is that on average, Americans buy 70 brand new articles of clothing each year. Now, you might be sitting there and saying, I haven't bought any new clothes since high school, or I bought one thing last year. That doesn't sound right. Remember, this is an average. So if you bought 0, that means someone else bought 140. If you and your friend both bought 0, then perhaps someone bought 210 garments. And this is something we're actually talking about a lot on Instagram, on the Clotheshorse account right now, because people hear 70 and it blows their minds. And yes, I know you're wondering, does that include socks? No, it also does include underwear. For the sake of the fashion industry, socks and underwear are generally considered non-apparel, in case you were wondering. 70 new articles of clothing can happen to you really fast. Let's say once a week, you kind of go on Zara on your lunch break and you add a few things to your cart and it comes and you return most of it. You keep one. You do that every week for a year. Right there, you're at 52. And we're not even thinking about like when you decided to get new yoga clothes, or you had to get new outfits for that wedding, or you wanted a whole new suitcase of clothes for a vacation. I mean, 70 is not as wild as it sounds when you really get down to it. And the thing about the 70 garments is that for the past 15 years, we've seen the industry and individual consumers buying and creating and buying double the amount of clothing as before that, but we're only wearing it for 40% of as much time as we used to, because it's coming in and out of our lives over and over again. What has happened is that many of us, myself included, have said, okay, well, it's time to do that closet clean out. I have too many clothes. We pack it all up. We make some tough decisions. We drive it over to the Goodwill, we drop it off, or some other donation bin around us. What happens is only a small percentage of those are ever worn by someone here in the United States. And most of them are shipped overseas, where they become someone else's problem. We've done a whole bunch of episodes on Clotheshorse about that with a foundation called the Aura Foundation. I urge you to go give them a follow on Instagram. There's more information about them later in this deck. But what they're doing is specifically fighting, or trying to counteract, trying to fix the steady and huge flow of unwanted clothing that's coming into Ghana. And in addition to just obliterating the domestic economy around textiles and clothing, it's also created an environmental crisis there. So please go check them out on Instagram. It's called The Ore Is Present. That's the account name. And I think you're going to see a lot of stuff firsthand that's going to really, really surprise you. Let's move on to the next slide. So fashion matters, right? I think that as a person who's had to work in this career my whole life, people kind of think it's like this silly thing. And why would we be talking about it? Why would we all be sitting here together tonight? But the reality is, it's a huge industry. More than 75 million people worldwide work within the global apparel and accessory industry, from people growing cotton to creating textiles to working in factories. Here in the United States, we have people working in retail stores, warehouses, design offices. We have people like me who have been buyers. We have so many people who are part of this industry. And on top of that, this industry, it's not just clothes, right? It creates 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions. It's all that dyeing and washing and production and shipping. And I mean, in my career, I have seen most clothing coming into the United States on a boat, which is slower and less expensive, and also has a smaller carbon footprint, to most clothes coming into the United States on an airplane, which is expensive, much higher carbon footprint. But guess what? It's really, really fast. We're going to get into fast fashion and what that is in a minute. But I think that metaphor of it once coming on a boat and taking 6 to 8 weeks to get here, and suddenly getting on an airplane and just being here in a day, really captures what's been happening in the industry and how our habits around clothing have changed. You and I we could be like, let's take a break from this meeting for 2 minutes and everybody go order something online, and we could see who could get it the fastest. I bet a bunch of us could have it by tomorrow. I mean, our consumption of clothing has sped up, as has the production. The industry uses a ton of water. Jennifer talked about Blue Water. I can't remember what it's called. Devastating. I too have not worn any denim since then. I can't get past it. That doesn't mean you have to give up your jeans. This is a shame-free zone. We all have reasons for wearing jeans, but when you see what happens when our jeans are made, it makes you think, I'm going to make these last 2 or 3 times longer than I have in the past, right? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So here's a question I get all the time. Amanda, if we're buying too much clothing, what's the right answer? How much clothing should we be buying? Well, I'm going to tell you, we need to buy, all of us, 75% less new clothing every year. So if we use that 70 as an average, that means we should all be buying about 15 new garments every year at most, which is still 1 a month. And then you get those 3 wild cards for, like, I don't know, other things you're doing, right? Or if you have a catastrophic jeans disaster, which has happened to me, you could get some more in there. But, and we're going to talk about this more in a few, that doesn't mean you have to walk around naked or have clothes that don't fit you or are falling apart. It's about changing our relationship with clothing, buying stuff secondhand, learning how to mend, becoming experts on laundry, really investing in our relationship with our clothing. I am the first to say, as a person who's worked in the fashion industry, I have definitely, in many years of my life, exceeded 70 without even being aware of it. I can't even tell you a number because it's not like I was keeping track, and it's very, very easy to buy a lot of clothing. And the thing that I remember most about the era of me buying a lot of clothes on a regular basis was that most of the new clothes I bought in the beginning of the year, I didn't have at the end of the year. I gave them to friends, or I took them to the Buffalo Exchange or some other resale place like that. I sold them on Poshmark. I had a yard sale. And it was almost like every year I was starting all over again, or that's how it would look if you had looked at my closet at on January 1st of one year and December 31st of that year, later that year. And I think, like I said, we're all working on this together. So if 15 brand new garments a year, minus socks and underwear, as we said, seems unreachable, maybe you can think about some number in the middle and gradually work into it. I think a lot of don't shop, a lot of sustainability conversations when it comes to clothing really have this sort of diet culture energy to them, where they say like, you either have to cut yourself off cold turkey or you're a bad person. And that's not what we're asking for. What we're asking for is continuous movement forward, continuous progress, not perfection. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So I'm going to start with something that many of you might already know, but I am always surprised by how many people think otherwise. Who makes our clothing? It is not robots. In fact, I'm sure if the industry could figure out at this point how to use robots to make clothing, they would, because they're probably tired of us asking who makes our clothing. But the reality is, like, while they've been trying to develop robots for this for a very long time, there's something about the human touch that makes sewing go so much better. The thing about all the humans who are making our clothing is that for the most part, they don't have a good job. Now they have a skilled job. I don't know about you, but I'm a mess at sewing. I had to make this apron in 7th grade and I probably pulled it out like 13 times during the space of like 4 weeks of class. Sewing is really, really hard. And yet, despite the fact that it is very skilled labor, that it is labor that takes a toll on your body, on your eyesight, it is often extremely underpaid. Most of these workers do not receive a living wage. A living wage is not minimum wage. A living wage is enough to have a good life, you know, to be able to afford rent and food and medicine and school and nice things in life, you know, to go see a movie, to be able to save some money, to be able to care for your children and eat nice food. And the majority of garment workers who make our clothing are not receiving living wage, even if they are receiving the minimum wage for their country. 85% of garment workers are women. And something I tell everyone all the time is that fashion is a feminist issue from beginning to end, from the people who make our clothing overseas to the people who sell it to people here in the United States. You know, most retail workers, especially in the apparel space, are also women. The people working in the corporate offices tend to be predominantly women. And women are the consumers of this industry in a much bigger way. It is so unfortunate that all the clothing that we buy, that we get for these hot, low prices, is often made by women who can't even support their families, who work 10 to 16 hours each day, 6 hours a week, who are often experiencing sexual harassment and abuse, physical and mental abuse. I've read story after story of garment workers who have chronic urinary tract infections because they're not allowed to use bathrooms. And on top of that, those are the people who are getting paid, right? There's a lot of forced labor happening in the fashion industry as well, from the Uyghur Muslims in China to these dowry contracts in India, where young women from rural areas are sort of trapped into years of forced labor, unpaid labor, with the expectation at the end that they'll have enough money for a dowry. Often they finish and they have no dowry because they've been fined for eating too much food or sleeping too much or having a bad attitude over the past few years. When you think about that, it makes buying a lot of clothing harder, right? When you see what's happening along the way. Let's move on to the next slide. So today we're going to be talking about, like, what is sustainable fashion? I like to call it slow fashion, actually, and how that contrasts to fast fashion. So in the past, when I would give these kinds of presentations or lead these kinds of conversations, I would start with, what is fast fashion? But I thought, you know, why don't we start with the good thing, and then we'll like contrast it to the bad thing. And so I don't know, it seems more positive to start with the good thing. So sustainable fashion, what I like to call slow fashion, you'll probably hear people using that across social media or in real life. It's a thoughtful approach to style and clothing that considers the process and the resources required to produce clothing. It's all the things we just talked about. It's having that moment of awareness, like, whoa, it's not just clothes. It's very complicated. It has a major impact on our planet and its people I'm going to take that knowledge and I'm going to change my behavior and change my relationship with clothing. The slow fashion community, the sustainable fashion community values the fair treatment of people, animals, and our planet. We say like people over profits, people over clothes, kind of. And the slow fashion community, sustainable fashion community, we really focus on several habits, which we're going to dissect in this conversation. One is reducing our consumption. In fact, I'm just going to tell you, there's a reason that that's first on the list, because that's the most important thing. A lot of DMs I get on Instagram, emails I receive are like, where should I buy this? What should I buy? What's a good brand? And I'm like, honestly, it doesn't matter where you shop. I mean, it does matter, of course, but ultimately, if you go to a sustainable brand and buy 70 garments this year or 140, that's not slow fashion. That's not even sustainable fashion. The focus needs to be on buying less clothing. And there's a whole sort of constellation of behaviors that come with buying less clothing. We're going to talk about that. One part of that is that we are proud outfit repeaters. So someone sent me a message on Instagram last week and they said, isn't being an outfit repeater just called wearing your clothes? It's like, touche, that's true. But as wild as it sounds, we have been part of a social media sort of social trend cycle for quite a while where wearing the same dress or suit for multiple weddings or birthday parties or Instagram posts, it's stigmatized, right? It's like, I can't wear that dress again. I just wore it to so-and-so's wedding, or I can't wear that for my birthday. I wore that for so-and-so's birthday. When you say it out loud, it does sound pretty ridiculous, but ultimately those are somewhere deep inside our subconscious right now. And a lot of us would feel, if we had one of those summers where you get invited to like a different wedding every other week, we would feel weird wearing the same dress for all of them. But why, right? That's what it is to be a proud outfit repeater, to say like, yeah, I'm wearing this again. This is my signature look. Look how great I look. You know, I'm going to keep wearing this every single time. We also spend our money strategically. So we support brands and makers who are trying to do the right thing. We shop small, we shop ethical. I will tell you from a buyer's perspective that I have seen my employers, there are only two things that motivate them to change their ways. One is the law, and two is declining sales or fear of declining sales. And it can be as simple as like, oh, it seems like a lot of people go to Coachella now and we didn't bring any clothes in for that. And then we had bad sales in March. Or it could be as big as people aren't buying from us anymore because they don't like the way we treat our workers. We might actually have to do something about it. This is one of those things that, you know, I have gotten pushback in the past where someone say like, well, what do I matter in this situation? And I'm like, maybe as an individual, it feels that way, but the magic happens when we all work together on the same thing, when we take collective action. And that includes where we spend our money and where we don't spend our money. And we mindfully rehome our unwanted clothing. That's a term I coined, mindful rehoming. Sounds really nice, doesn't it? Just gonna pat myself on the back, but this means we're not in the cycle of buy, closet, trash can, donation bin, but we actually say like, okay, we're gonna redistribute our things within our community. We're going to have clothing swap parties with our friends. We're gonna rehome in our local Buy Nothing group. We're gonna reach out to other shelters and charities in our area and try to rehome our stuff there rather than just dumping it off at the Goodwill. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as well. And there are going to be more resources at the end for that. So let's move on to the next slide. I just wanted to share this with all of you. These are kind of like who we are as the slow fashion, sustainable fashion community. We wear clothes again, we shop secondhand. We are getting really good at laundry. Those of us who barely can thread a needle are learning how to repair our clothes or pay someone else to do it. There's no shame in that. We support small business. We don't jam our stuff in donation bins. We wear our stuff again. We make it last. But most importantly, we share knowledge and we're welcoming to others. And I seriously, if someone emails me and says, I bought 300 articles of clothing, last year, I'm like, okay, cool. Let's like talk about what you're going to do next. And what are you doing with all this clothes? Like, tell me your story. We're not like, ew, get out of here. Come back when you've cut down by 75%. And, I think that's something I can't emphasize enough is that all of you can have that same kind of impact on your sphere of influence, whether it's your friends, your family, your coworkers, your neighbors. When they see you wearing the same thing again, or bragging about what you scored at the Goodwill, or how into Poshmark you are right now, or how you took that visible mending class, they get inspired to do the same thing. It's the inverse of what was happening in the past, where you have to have a new t-shirt for your bachelorette party and you need to wear a new thing for every event. We're kind of undoing that in the same way that it happened in the first place, because we're all influencers in this space. All of us are, and we have a lot of impact on the people around us. So I like to imagine that we're taking all of this and we're kind of spreading it out in a web, and it just goes bigger and bigger. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So what is fast fashion? I'm sure you're getting an inkling by now, but I will tell you that I think there's still a lot of confusion about what is fast fashion versus not fast fashion. You're going to be surprised when we break this down, but once you know it, you can't unsee it. So here's what fast fashion is not. It's not a specific price. I know a lot of the misconception out there is that fast fashion is inexpensive. So often it's really easy to come to the table and say, okay, well, clearly like Shein is fast fashion, and Zara and H&M and Forever 21, but like, could Anthropologie be fast fashion? Spoiler, it is. Fast fashion is not a certain aesthetic. It's not trendy or sexy or stretchy or whatever. It's not just for young people. In fact, fast fashion is also not a particular customer base. Fast fashion caters to people of all ages and socioeconomic backgrounds, people who live all over the world at this point, of all ages. You can't assume because a store has a target customer of an older person that is less likely to be fast fashion than a store targeted towards younger people, and vice versa. You can't assume because it's more or less expensive that it isn't or it is not fast fashion. Just because it's in a mall doesn't mean it is, but just because it's not in a mall doesn't mean it isn't, right? You can't identify fast fashion by any of these things, by the way it feels to go into the store. You can't identify it by the celebrities promoting it. So you're probably like, Amanda, well then, like, I don't know, what is this nebulous fast fashion thing? Well, let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about how to spot it. So fast fashion is actually a business model. It relies on selling us, are you ready for this? As much stuff as possible, as often as possible. And that, my friends, is how you end up with 70 or 140 or 210 new articles of clothing in a year, and you can't figure out how it happened. We've all been there. It is a way of doing business that cannot exist without the overconsumption of its customers. Are you getting tons of texts from a brand like every day asking you to buy something or offering you a discount code? Same thing with emails. If someone is constantly sort of poking you and saying, hey, like, have you bought something from us recently? It's probably a pretty good sign it's fast fashion, because they need you to come back in there. And in fact, many of my jobs, our goal was that we would get our customers to come to our physical stores at least once every week, and on our websites multiple times per week. In fact, I worked for one company, and our strategy was to get our customers to come to our website every day. And so every day at noon, we launched new arrivals so people would come. I mean, it is about getting you to come back again and again and buy stuff each time. And at some point, you lose track of what you've bought, right? This is an industry that, it prioritizes profits over people. And that means the people that are making the clothes, working in the offices and stores, dealing with the burden of our discarded clothing, and even the customer. We're going to talk a little bit about that, because often fast fashion, in order to get us to buy over and over again, have to offer us a lot of deals, right? And so you think you're getting a deal, but I don't know about you, many times when I'm like, wow, I can't believe I got that for 75% off. And then it comes to my house and I put it on, I'm like, yeah, I can believe I got that for 75% off, right? It fits weird. It smushed my chest into like a rectangle. It made me stinky. It broke the first time I wore it. You all know, we've all been there. Let's move on to the next slide. So I'm just going to tell you now that in 2023, most large brands and retailers are fast fashion. They're using that model. And it's a very long tale I could weave for you, but I'm going to keep it short, which is that we saw this really happen after the recession of 2008, where a lot of retailers who weren't operating under that fast fashion model were forced to mark everything down because people were struggling financially. And as they were doing that at the same time, that was the rise of Forever 21 and H&M, which feel like the old school version of fast fashion, because now we've got like super fast fashion like Shein and Boohoo. But those companies, especially Forever 21, they were just blowing up. They were opening bigger and bigger stores, more and more stores. And all the other retailers who weren't really fast fashion at that point were like, oh man, like how do we stay competitive? In fact, I worked for a retailer at that point that they were a little fast fashion-y. Our quality wasn't amazing, but we didn't churn out tons of new product all the time. But I saw over the span of I worked for that company for almost 10 years. I saw our entire business model change, where we used to order things 6 months in advance, right? We'd be done. Like right now in January, we'd be through summer. We'd be talking about holiday right now. We didn't do that anymore. We were bringing in so much new stuff and so fast to keep up with the Forever 21s of the world that it's January and we were saying, okay, what can we get for February? How much more new stuff can we add for February? We saw things become less expensive because we were going to have to put them on sale more often. I think that's a really important thing to call out, is that we've reached a point in the fashion industry where we plan on selling most of our stuff on sale. So if you go into a store and the dress has a tag on it that says $88, I can assure you that no one who designed or made that dress expects it to sell for $88. They're expecting it to sell for probably like $40. And so what they did is they created a dress that is worth $40 and still highly profitable, but they're making it appear as if it's $88. So we kind of just changed everything that we did. And we made things with cheaper fabrics. When you are in a design meeting and you're like, oh, I love it, let's buy that one, the production person always says, you can't afford it. And we're like, okay, swap the fabric. And then usually we can move on with it. Oh, it's still too expensive. Let's take off the pockets. Oh, it's still too expensive. Let's make the skirt like 3 inches shorter. Oh, it's still too expensive. Okay, take out the lining. I mean, we just like chip away at it. And then we're like, okay, now we reached that point. We took everything off of it. We only put the embellishment on the front, or we made it short sleeve instead of long sleeve, even though it's December. Like we'll just keep chipping away at it until we can hit that price point. We stopped fitting it on people because it cost too much money to bring in a fit model multiple times and fly over the samples and check them out. We just kept cutting things off. Let's move on to the next slide. So as I said, I already spoiled this, but look at the huge font I put it in. In 2023, most big retailers and brands operate using the fast fashion model. Now, I know I told you a lot of stuff, but if only there were an easier way you could figure this out. Let's go on to the next slide. Before we go into that, I just also want to say something that shocks me every time I realize it is that clothes are more expensive now. I mean, clothes are cheaper now than they were in the 1990s. And those of you who bought clothes in the 1990s, I bet you're kind of like, yeah. I felt like, for example, the Delia's catalog was like the most expensive place you could ever buy clothes. And now teenagers can go buy clothes for half that price despite inflation. And really how clothes became so cheap, so inexpensive, is because of the fast fashionification of the entire industry. All right, we can move on. Okay, so fast fashion is known for its deals. And as you probably are picking up already, the deals might not be that great, right? Because we're planning that we're going to sell it to you on sale in the first place. So even as a customer, even if you didn't know, wow, this is like having a negative impact on the planet. The people who make it are just, it's not a good situation. You kind of know as a customer that the clothes you buy these days are pretty disappointing. We shifted so heavily into polyester and synthetics. About 60 to 70% of the clothing made and sold today is made of polyester. And that shocked me because I think we always think of like the 70s, right? That was the era of polyester, but actually right now is the golden age of polyester, if you want to call it that, where most clothes are synthetic. That's because it's cheap, right? It's not great, and it sheds microplastics. And you have to use oil to make it. The process of producing polyester is actually like super intensive in terms of energy and additional fuel, in addition to the petroleum products that you need to actually make the fabric. And I always thought like, oh, I could spot polyester, right? It's like thick, it's got that, it makes you smelly, you know it. If you're an avid thrift shopper like me, you know polyester, right? Well, polyester technology has gotten so good that you probably are wearing polyester right now and you don't know it. Like, is it sheer and filmy? Is it satiny? Does it kind of almost feel like cotton, but not quite? Is it a really itchy sweater? I mean, there are a million ways in which synthetics come into our life. On top of that, we said, the YKK zipper, like the classic zipper, we can't afford that anymore. We're gonna get these weird plastic zippers where the teeth break off. We're gonna get rid of all the pockets in the lining, and we're just gonna make a less great product. But then we're also gonna squeeze the factories and therefore the garment workers for even cheaper pricing. And we had to do that because now, like I said earlier, everything comes on an airplane. And for some context there, in the beginning of my career, if you wanted to ship something on an airplane, you would have to set up a meeting with an executive of the company. And this was a big company that had like 300 stores. You'd have to set up a meeting with an executive and say, listen, I really need this dress to come in next month, and it won't be here on the boat. And it's like the most important part of our whole merchandising story. And then maybe they would say, you can ship half of it on an airplane. Why? Because to ship a dress on an airplane, it's probably like $5 to $10, more like 10 right now with fuel costs. To ship it on a boat, it's going to be like 50 cents. And so now knowing that most of your clothes are shipped, you realize if we're going to pay $5 to $10 a unit to ship something on an airplane, to send it on a flight over the Pacific Ocean, well, we got to make up that $5 to $10 somewhere else. And it's always going to be in the materials, in the sewing, and it's going to come out of the garment workers' pockets. We just get left with a lot of clothes that aren't that great. And when people talk, when we talk about the 70 garments per year number on social media, there are people who show up and shame other people for doing that, for buying 70 clothes. And I say it's way too easy to buy all those clothes when none of them are great, when none of them last long, when none of them make you feel great, because enough effort wasn't put into it to make it fit you well or make you feel great or make it last for a long time. This is a bad deal for everybody. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this is a handy checklist that you might even want to write down a piece of paper, print this out, how to spot fast fashion, because a lot of emails I get are, is Madewell fast fashion? Is Anthropologie fast fashion? Is Target fast fashion? Said, well, the great news about fast fashion is that because it's a business model, they all kind of have the same tricks. So it's really easy to spot. So I made this handy checklist that you can use for yourself. And I encourage you to share on social media as well. Does the store or website have hundreds or thousands of items for sale? If you check that box, it's definitely fast fashion. Because if we want to get you to come back over and over again, remember that one job I had wanted you to come every day and buy something. We got to give you new stuff all the time. And this was, as I saw the fast fashionification of clothing during my career, I saw that we went from maybe delivering 30 new styles every month to 100, and then 200, and then 300, so that we could launch new stuff all the time. And every time you went into the store, it would look totally different. You know, it's this illusion of choice that it's intended to get you to fill up that shopping basket every time. It's a major symptom of fast fashion. Does the brand launch new items every week, every day? That's another thing. It's about getting you to come back as often as possible. Even if a brand is launching new stuff every week versus every day, I think it's quite a red flag. And we've seen a lot of brands go from delivering collections to just delivering stuff every day or every week, right? It doesn't really tell a story like they used to. Do things seem to go on sale pretty fast? I'm sure we all have a place in mind where we would be embarrassed to pay full price, because it would mean that we hadn't been patient enough to just wait a few more weeks. I'm sure you'll all have a place in mind. I'll just throw it out there. Anytime I've bought something full price at Macy's, I've been like, man, I am bringing great shame to my family, because I know that this is going to go on sale like in 3 minutes, right? That's a great example of one. These things go on sale really fast because, one, they're engineered to sell on sale. But two, when you're just like delivering more and more stuff every day, every week, you have to put stuff on sale fast so you can get rid of it fast, so you have more room for the other new stuff that's going to keep coming. Does the brand have a dazzling array of deals? Is there like a promo code for this and another like additional 30% off this? And then if you sign up for the credit card, you get another 10% off. Always a sign of fast fashion. And the goal there is not to reward you, the loyal customer, with some great deals. It's to confuse you into buying more stuff where you're like, I can't skip this now. I don't know if any of you have ever gone to a website where there's a timer and it's like, this deal is ending and it's like counting down. Classic trick. I guarantee it's going to count down and it's going to start all over again. The deals will keep coming. And another one is, does the brand copy or steal designs from designers and artists? Where there's smoke, there's fire. If they did it once, they probably did it a lot. And they're doing that because when you want to deliver hundreds or thousands of new styles every month, you run out of ideas. You don't have enough designers to keep up with that. And so you got to start taking them from other places. I would say if you could check more than one thing on this sheet, the place you're thinking about is fast fashion. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to be very blunt here that fast fashion as we know it right now, the constant stream of products, shipping it all on airplanes, all the discount codes and deals and who knows what else is going on, it cannot operate without worker exploitation. And I underscore that a lot because all of us have to pick the thing that's most important to us, that really like touches us, and use that as our motivation for changing not just ourselves, but the people around us. For some people, it's going to be all about the carbon footprint. For others, it's going to be all about the water. For others, it's going to be all about the microplastics. For me, it is about the people involved in the worker exploitation. I come from a low income background, and I often think that if clothes were still made here in the United States, my family, myself, we would be a part of this. And so this is the thing that really, really motivates me. But I want you to pick your thing. Maybe it's all of this. Keep thinking about that so that you can get yourself going into this new path forward. I want to be clear that retailers know that they are asking for prices that are too low, but they ask for them anyway. And I can say that having been on the other side where I'm negotiating the pricing. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so here's the thing. More and more people care about this than ever have before, which makes me so happy. And I can assure you that brands and retailers know that. And so they're trying to figure out what to do, right? The thing is, the business model that they have, it's like to make it more sustainable, more ethical, just more right with the world. It can't happen because if your whole balance sheet relies on selling people as much clothing as often as possible, you can't suddenly stop doing that, right? Or you can't say, okay, now we're going to pay everyone fairly and we're going to make better clothing and it's going to cost more and we're not going to put everything on sale and we're not going to put it on airplanes anymore. It's just not that simple, right? And you'll lose customers, or maybe you won't, but ultimately for these larger companies, it's just like something it would involve like tearing the whole thing down and starting over. And retailers know that, which is why, and I'm sure you've seen this, you've seen some conscious collections, you've seen some sustainable stuff, you've seen the eco-friendly things, you've seen the thing that like, oh, we use recyclable mailers, all of these things. That is called greenwashing. And that is the industry's attempt at saying like, hey, we get it. You are stressed out about this. We all have eco anxiety. Don't worry. You can still come over here and buy all this stuff, keep buying as much as you were before, but now it'll be all okay, right? I think by now you probably are realizing that that might not be true, but greenwashing is bigger than ever right now, because I can assure you, retailers are watching the trends, they're watching stuff happening on social media, they're seeing the conversation that we're having, and they're worried. And so they say like, okay, I think this whole like sustainability, caring about the planet, it's a trend, just like a trend of like wearing plaid or platform shoes or polyester bell bottoms, what have you. It's a trend that we need to get onto. It's when we start seeing these conscious collections and whatnot coming our way, it's really a bad faith attempt at getting us to continue to buy stuff. It tries to convince us that we can still buy as much as we want, as often as we want, and it will not have a negative impact on the planet and its people. And it is fundamentally untrue. So let's go on to the next slide, because I think that it can feel overwhelming. You're probably already like, okay, Amanda, you are hitting me with so many facts. And now you're telling me that also people might be sharing information that isn't real. Well, the good news is that you, all of us, can be a top level, high caliber greenwashing detective with a bare minimum of training, because everybody kind of uses the same tricks. And much like we said, like once you start to see fast fashion, you can't unsee it. With greenwashing, it's the same way too. I'm just like such a troll. I'm like, no, oh, come on, no, like on my feed every day. So let's go on to the next slide and look at some of the tricks that you might see. And once again, you're going to get a copy of this deck, so you can take a look at this later. Have it with you when you're scrolling through Instagram or going onto your favorite website. So one is that this is like the number one for sure, is to look out for words that don't mean very much because they aren't measurable, right? If we're talking about carbon emissions or water usage, or even just like what the fabric is made of, those things can be pretty measurable and you can prove them true or false. We don't see a lot of that. Instead, we see words like green, which only makes sense if we're talking about the color. And even then, some people the people are colorblind and might not even know. Green might not be measurable, right? Eco-friendly, I don't even know what that means. The number of times I see that word on bottles of cleaners to cosmetics to clothing makes my blood boil. Natural also doesn't mean much. I mean, like hot lava is natural. That's not necessarily good for us. Conscious is another one of my favorite ones. And I think that one sort of butters you up and says like, oh, you're like a lot higher level of consciousness than everyone around you. So come on over here and buy this collection. No. Unless we're talking unconscious versus conscious in terms of like your physical state of being, not measurable. Recycled, that's another one where I'm like, okay, great. Well, that thing was recycled, but is it recyclable? Because if it's not, then it's just going to the landfill anyway. It's just a nice word, right? And in many cases, you're going to be sad to hear this, sustainable is often used incorrectly, because while I think there are ways you can measure sustainability, the average consumer isn't going to ask that. And often when retailers are coming to the table with their like sustainable collection, they might be using some recycled fabrics. It might be more eco-friendly. They're throwing those adjectives towards us along with sustainable. They never talk about like, what are the wages that the workers made? What was the water waste? What happens to this garment when I'm done with it? None of that, right? So a lot of times the word sustainable, when it's used in these kinds of campaigns, just doesn't mean much. Next, this is one that always really gets me riled up. I call it fluffy washing. And it's when brands exploit your love of animals to sell you dumb stuff. Shein did one a couple years ago where, I don't know, they were like trying to help animals, and you could buy this collection of t-shirts with zoo animals on it. I'm still confused about that one. Or H&M did a collab with PETA that definitely got a lot of internet backlash for similar reasons. The real talk is that if a brand really cared about animals, really loved animals, and I say this as a person with 5 cats, so I like really love animals. If they really cared about that, they probably wouldn't be making a ton of clothes, way more than anyone needs, right? They would be doing something else with their time. Next, and this is one I have fallen for many times, do not let them trick you with a ton of fancy sounding certifications and organizations. Oftentimes, what I have learned is that many of these certifications and organizations are actually created by the industry themselves, funded by the industry themselves, and then the certifications are handed out by the industry. So it's sort of like if I said, hey, just want to let you know that like I am certified, the coolest person ever, certified by me. You might be like glad that I'm having a nice day, but you know, it doesn't really hold up in court. And so I always find it's very easy to get the answer. If someone's throwing a certification or a fabric at you and you're like, I don't know, just go Google it and add the word greenwashing and the results come up pretty fast. Beware of ad bluster. And I love this term. It was created by Greenpeace. And it's when a brand just bombards you with ads and press about this one good thing they did. A brand that does this very frequently, is very successful at ad bluster, is Nike, where they will say, hey, look at this sick one shoe that we made of recycled material. It's one collection. We made 1,000 of them, and there are blog posts everywhere. And I see influencers with it on social media, like news media outlets that I respect are writing about this one line of shoes when it's probably 1% of all the shoes that Nike made that year. And the other 99% are completely unsustainable and made in not great conditions, right? So ad bluster is a big one. If I start to see a lot of blog posts that seem to have the same copy over and over again, that's another great example of them just being really good at sending out a press release. And I would urge you to like look deeper into that as well. And lastly, don't get caught up in the one green aspect of a business that they're selling you. Like the one I see a lot is like, and we use compostable packaging, or we do this one thing where we donate a tree for every polyester pair of pants you buy or something like that. That's not that great, right? But these are things that like we all want to do the best thing. We're all good people and we want to have the best impact on the world. So you say like, oh, you planted tree. Okay. Oh, the packaging is compostable. I'm making the right decision. And that's the point of it, right? Is to manipulate you into shopping, especially if you're already worrying about your impact on the planet. All right, let's move on to the next slide. That's all you had to do. Remember I said it was like a really short training protocol to become a high caliber greenwashing detective? All you needed to do is learn those 5 things to spot. And I would just say, listen, read labels and details on the brand website. If I encounter something that stumps me, I just Google it along with the word greenwashing. There are other tools and websites out there that will help you kind of sift through some of this, and the links will be in this deck. And don't feel weird asking brands for the details. I know it feels weird, right? Because you're like, I don't want them to think I'm a troll or a jerk. I don't want to be rude. It's not rude to ask about what you're about to buy. As my grandma always said, you would never buy a car without test driving it, right? She was referring to something else. I'll let you guess on that. But I wouldn't buy something if I didn't know the answer about it. And if the brand can't tell me that, then probably they don't deserve my money. And remember, it's progress, not perfection. I think that we let perfection be the enemy of good a lot of times. And really what we need to do is know that we are constantly working to do better. Sometimes we might mess up. Sometimes we might buy a weird polyester jumpsuit that we only wore one time and then we spilled wine all over it. That's okay. But we're trying to be better and better every day. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Just a reminder to all of you, no matter what someone tries to tell you, it is not sustainable if it's not good for both the planet and its people. Most of the greenwashing stuff I see out there is really focused on recyclable materials, not even recyclable, recycled materials or space age polymers or whatever they're throwing your way, but they never talk about the people making the clothes. And to me, that is an indicator that probably all the other nonsense they're telling me isn't real either. So just something to think about and something to ask about. Once again, if a brand doesn't want to give you the answer, that's a red flag right there. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, I hope by now you are all riled up, because even though I talk about this stuff all the time, I'm starting to get riled up. There's so many things you can do here. You can be angry, you can be sad for a little bit. I've definitely had a lot of those moments over the years, but then you can start making some change both in your life and the lives of the people around you. You know, you can start to dig deep into why you shop, why you do the things you do. For me, I realized that a lot of times I was shopping because I was unhappy, because I hated my job, or I was in a bad relationship, or I had weird stuff going on with my family. And getting to that point and finding other things I could do that, instead of being sort of destructive in the way shopping was, and I'm not even talking on the planet, but like to my bank account, and then I would get the thing and be disappointed. It was just destruction. I started to think about taking those times when I was feeling bad and doing something constructive, building something in my life, whether it was spending time with someone I love or calling them on the phone, way better than buying something from Zara, going for a walk, reading a book, taking some time to myself, hanging out with my cat. I have a lot to choose from, so there's always one around. I found that these things that were building something, relationships, skills, my own health, those kinds of things, made me way happier than shopping ever did. And that was part of just changing my habits, right? That along with that is a habit for sure, is buying less in the first place and making it last a lot longer. I realize I have a typo here and I'm filled with shame as a spelling bee champion. But this includes learning to mend. Visual mending is an art form, and it's so cool, and it customizes all of your clothing, which is great. And if you don't have time to do that, you can pay someone to do it. I have this vision of an economy that shifts, where people who once had to work in clothing stores can now come and like learn all of these skills and repair clothes and make a better living and be proud of their work and be treated better. I think that as we move our spending away from this steady flow of new clothes and shoes and belts and earrings, we're going to see other things pop up in our economy. Get good at doing laundry. I cannot recommend it enough. Go to your nearest thrift store, get a copy of Hints by Heloise. There's always like 10 of them. To me, that is the gold standard, and getting the laundry done in the right way. Or, you know, go online. The Spruce has a lot of really comprehensive and more modern laundry advice than say Heloise does, but I like to use them in tandem. And just in general, slow down, you know, put it in your cart and wait until tomorrow. Put it in your cart and wait 2 days. Every time I do that, I don't want it the next day. Be a proud outfit repeater. Yes, once again, this is called wearing your clothes. I know, but it is a new habit for a lot of us to wear it over and over again, to remix it with other things we own, to see all the different ways we can wear something. And if you have a favorite brand that you think is not doing a good job, that is perhaps not being sustainable or ethical or thinking forward, tell them you want it, email them, tweet them, comment on their Instagram, go to their, well, maybe don't go to the stores and harass people, but, you know, write a letter. We got to fund the USPS anyway. And, you know, I think it's so easy to feel as if you are powerless. I definitely struggle with that sometimes too, where you're like, I'm not Jeff Bezos. What does anyone care what I have to say? But you know what? As a consumer, you have so much more power than you can ever imagine, because without your wallet, these companies, they've got nothing, right? And that's a great transition into also vote with your wallet. When you are going to buy something, whether it's new or secondhand, support brands and businesses who share your values. And there are tools that I suggest here that you can use for that. Of course, I'm also going to say thoughtfully rehome your unwanted clothing. There are going to be things you don't want anymore. Your life changes, your job changes, you move to a new climate, you change size, who you are changes. We're all constantly changing. Rehome it within your community. I can't recommend enough. Joining your local Buy Nothing group is a game changer. And it's awesome when you have to move to see someone come and actually take something that you can't use anymore and give it a new life. I love that. Pass it on to the other people in your life. This is something we talk about a lot on the Clotheshorse Instagram. So definitely give a follow. There are a lot more resources there around mindful rehoming, and everybody in our community always has a lot of really great suggestions for apps and other organizations. All right, let's go into the next slide. Adopt a secondhand first approach. So I know this one is kind of either you've been thrifting your whole life and it's like second nature to you. And like, you're like, why wouldn't someone buy used clothes? Or you're like, whoa, I don't even know about this. I think that we tend to think that the only place you can get secondhand clothing is a thrift store. And for all of you regular thrifters out there, you know that when you go out with something specific in mind, you're not going to find it for like 3 months. But if you aren't looking for it, it'll pop up the first trick. I swear, I'm not superstitious, but that is one of the rules of thrifting. But the great news is that we live in the golden era, not just of polyester, but also secondhand shopping. Yes, you can go to thrift stores, flea markets, yard sales, estate sales. You can also go to vintage shops. Antique malls always have, if you love vintage, that's where you get the really good vintage clothes at a hot deal. That's a pro tip right there. Consignment stores exist all over the place for people of all different ages and aesthetics. And I love seeing more and more of those growing. Poshmark is great. If there's a brand you love. I have a friend who really loves Madewell jeans, but hates the Madewell ethics, right? She'll go to the Madewell store and try on a pair of jeans and find the pair that she likes and the size she likes, and then immediately get her on her phone and find them secondhand on Poshmark for like a quarter of the price and buy them. So if you are really brand focused, or you like really know what you like, Poshmark is a great resource online. The Real, if you're fancy schmancy, has a lot more luxury brands. ThredUp is great for kids. They have just like an infinite amount of secondhand clothing there. Also good for more casual wear. I think it's hard if you're trying to do the trick my friend does with Madewell denim. It's a lot more difficult, but if you're just like into like browsing, or you have a vaguer idea of what you want, that's a great place. Depop is great. It's a little bit more trendy, vintage, handmade, all kinds of cool stuff in between. McCarty is actually, someone told me who, I really trust their opinion on this. They told me that actually McCarty is now the best place to shop. So check that out. They have an app, Etsy, eBay, Vinted. I mean, in real life, we've got Buffalo Exchange and Plato's Closet and Uptown Cheapskate, and more of these secondhand stores are popping up. I just came back from Japan 2 weeks ago, and I couldn't believe how many like real life secondhand stores there were, and they were all curated to every aesthetic you could think of, every different kind of person. And I was just walking around, watching tons of people walking around with bags from all these secondhand stores, and it made me so happy. And I think that's the direction we're going here in the United States. I also just say, if you get invited to a lot of weddings and things like that, and you need special occasion wear, just rent it. Rent it around the way is great for that. I don't think you need to be renting your clothes on a daily basis, but for something like that you really only can wear a few times in 1 year, just go ahead and rent it and save yourself a lot of money. All right, let's move on to the next slide. This is just the last one I'm going to say. I really believe a big part of slow fashion, sustainable fashion is shopping small. That is where your money has an immediate impact. If you spend $100 at a small business, 40 some odd dollars stays in the community. If you go to say Target or Best Buy or what have you, and you spend $100, only $14 stays in the community. I also just think that small businesses have the ability to pivot and make changes to be more ethical and sustainable a lot more easily. And the metaphor I always put out there is that turning around a bike is easy, right? It's just like, droop, You might fall off if you're not great at it. So do it slowly. But turning around a huge cruise ship, I learned like a year ago that if you want to turn a cruise ship around, and I learned this in an article about a cruise ship that was full of COVID, of course, it takes a whole day to turn a cruise ship around. Like it's just this, and it's like a huge turn, right? That's where big business is. For them to change their ways in a significant way is whatever the version of a day is for them. It's like 10, 20 years. And what we really need is effective change now, and small businesses can do that. I think we're probably getting to the end here. Let's see what's next. Oh, most importantly, all the stuff that you learned tonight, that you're going to learn in the future, that you're going to review in here, share it with everyone in your life. One of the best things I ever heard is that my dad listened to Clotheshorse and stopped buying polyester button-ups, even though it meant he had to learn how to iron. And I loved that because I was like not trying to get my family into it yet. I wasn't quite there yet. And then I didn't even have to. They did it themselves. Brag about all the great things you're doing, your sustainable changes, your decisions, all this amazing knowledge that you have now. And you can get involved in a bunch of organizations I've shared here. You can read books. You can watch The True Cost. I think I saw someone mention that in chat. And of course, I have to plug Clotheshorse, my podcast, which has 150 episodes, probably at least 300 hours of content that you could listen to. Go ahead and give that a listen. Because like I said, this is like that Cliff Notes version of a sustainable fashion versus fast fashion. There's a lot more nuance under the covers there. These are all these sources. Once again, go give these articles a read when you get the PDF. And I think the last thing is just like, get in touch with me if you have questions. Give me a follow on Instagram, drop me an email, and I am looking forward to meeting all of you.
Great. Thank you so much. I know it made my librarian heart happy when I saw your little footnotes up there. I'm like, oh, she has sources.
I mean, listen, I am #1 fan of the library. I get excited when libraries reached out to me because that was my home away from home when I was a kid. All summer, I had this little vintage suitcase that I would take and fill with books. I would go home and read them all that day and bring them back the next day and swap them. So I love the library.
And yet you wound up in fashion rather than as a librarian.
It's a complicated story. Yeah. It's a long story.
Fair.
All right, does anybody have any questions?
We did have several come through on chat. Jennifer, do you want to pick that up?
Sure, I wrote down a couple, so you may have seen more than I did, but the first one, well, a lot of people are motivated to, share your information or spread the word with older students. I mean, get high school classes to teach it, to get students involved in doing projects. But one woman seemed to ask more for the younger, just children in her own family to say, like, how do you get the point across to children about buying less or buying quality rather than quantity?
I think that, and this is a great question because one of my missions for this year for Clotheshorse is really digging deep into why we buy so many clothes and so many other things, right? Because maybe if you're not buying a lot of clothes, you buy a bunch of houseplants. We all know that person too, right? And something that I have been thinking a lot about is how these habits start when we're kids. And I think it's our responsibility as adults in life, in the lives of children, to set the standard, to set the tone. So for example, my habit of shopping when I'm having a hard time, I can trace that back to my grandma, who would take me out of school on Fridays and take me shopping if I was depressed, right? And shopping was how the people in my family who didn't really get along very well, it was like the one way they could spend time together and show their love. Like you would show someone love by saying, you should buy that, right? A lot of this story probably really resonates with you. I think it's really important for us to take the focus off of shopping. So do other things with kids. Take them to do other things. Take them to the library, take them out for a walk, spend time with them that is not at a mall or a store. And I also think, I wish that, I will preface this by saying I'm probably one of the last generations of people who got to take home ec. And that's because in Pennsylvania, it was required by law through the last century. But I know many other states stopped before then. And I think if we could teach those skills to children, repair, laundry, I think it teaches a lot more respect for the things in our lives and the artistry and skill that goes into it, and teaches us how to care for things. Because I've definitely done an episode about Clotheshorse about this. I have a lot of feelings about it, but really taking home ec and industrial arts out of public schools and not making them mandatory anymore really turned a lot of us into born consumers who didn't know how clothes were made and couldn't repair our clothes or even sew a button on, didn't know how to cook food, so had to order takeout. And I think it's hard for me to imagine that stuff coming back into school, even though I wish it would. And I think as adults, we need to be sharing those skills with kids.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you have one, Sam, or go ahead?
I was going to take some things from the Q&A.
Yep.
So one, I think we've kind of addressed in the chat as well, is about what is your take on textile recycling companies?
Okay, that is a great question. So if you are going to give clothing or other textiles from your home to a textile recycling company, please do your research. Because the fact of the matter is, and this was a stunning revelation for me after working in this industry for so long and assuming that textile recycling was really what it sounds like, which is probably, I bet this is what you imagine. A dump truck pulls up to one end of a factory and it's just full of all these clothes. It dumps them in one end, all this like, there's, I don't know, there's conveyor belts and steam comes out and there's things turning, right? And then at the other end, boop, some fabric pops out. Unfortunately, that is not the case. We actually have very minimal technology around recycling fabrics. One of the main reasons is most fabrics at this point are a complex blend of different kinds of fibers, mixtures of polyester, acrylic, different kinds of polyesters, maybe some cotton thrown in there, maybe some wool, all kinds of other things. And because they are these blends, they are basically impossible to recycle at this point. So France has actually moved forward with kind of limiting the amount of blends that you're allowed to use in terms of fabric clothing you're selling in that country. But even still, textile recycling doesn't really exist. So when you see a textile recycling company, what they are really doing is also ostensibly what the Goodwill is doing. I see someone asked about that. So these companies receive all of these clothes and other things, and they sort them, right? And they will grade them A through F. And the A things they might sell off to vintage sellers, vintage stores. They may bundle them up and sell them off to other vintage stores. Thrift stores, right? Some thrift stores actually buy their inventory, believe it or not. Some of them, the Fs, they get shredded up, right? They might be used to stuff a car seat, to go into your stereo speakers, even go into your car upholstery or other furniture. Others that are slightly better have some absorbency or use to them will be turned into industrial rags. The middle grade stuff, that B, C, and maybe D stuff, actually ends up getting shipped overseas, depending on the grade, right? So higher grade stuff might go to Europe. Lower grade stuff is going to go to the global South, meaning Africa and South America. And when we talked earlier, earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that, for example, the Aura Foundation is doing all this work in Ghana, where just boat after boat of this stuff shows up every day. And there's way too much of it. And these are these like B, C, D garments that aren't really great in the first place. They see a lot of like H&M in there. They see a lot of one-off t-shirts that people had made for like office 5Ks and bachelorette parties. Y'all know what I'm talking about. So Goodwill and some of the other big thrift companies operate in a very similar way, and that they receive infinitely more stuff than they can sell in any given time, believe it or not. When I hear people say that there's nothing left in thrift stores, I'm like, no, you are wrong. There's nothing there that you like, fine, but there is plenty of stuff. I actually did an episode earlier this year with my daughter as a guest, because my daughter worked as a sorter at the Goodwill for 6 months, and it was a soul-crushing experience, but it was really great to hear firsthand the things that I already knew from other conversations I'd had, research I'd done, where basically the volume of stuff coming in there is so high that they only pull the most perfect items to sell on the floor. And that's maybe like 5–10% of what they receive. If it doesn't sell in a week or two, they have to pull it to make room for more stuff. And everything else either goes in a dumpster if it's just like beyond, or it gets packed, baled up and sent off to these textile recycling companies where it enters that flow of being sorted again and then sold off and shipped overseas. And, you know, once again, I would urge all of you to follow the OR Foundation. The OR is present on Instagram to learn more about the impacts of this, because we're talking clothes washing up on beaches, clogging waterways, open pits that are being used as landfills, and clothes just blowing around and whatnot. There's another site in Chile. It's called the Atacama Desert, and they're just going out and dumping it into mountains of clothing in the desert. I see that Nicole was asking if they are making textiles into carpet, padding, insulation, etc. I would just confirm with them. It's not trollish to ask them if 100% that's the case, or to say, do you ship any of the stuff overseas? Just ask. They'll tell you either way. But ultimately, it is far more profitable to ship these clothes overseas and resell them by the bale than it is to turn them into insulation. So this is just something you want to double check on.
We had a question too in the Q&A. And they're from the same person. I'm kind of gonna, well, they're pretty different topics, so I will not package them together. One is just about workplace pressure, where being extremely fashionable, on trend is important. How would you address that? And you worked in an industry where I'm sure
I can tell you all about it. Yeah, I mean, I've worked in fashion my whole career, where it was like, some of my clothes, I think I only wore 2 or 3 times because I couldn't wear them to the office a 4th time. At one of my jobs, I also got a $1,000 a month clothing allowance, and that was at cost. So I just had like every month my job was giving me $4,000 worth of clothes on top of everything else, you know. That's a lot of clothes. When I left that job, they went bankrupt. I don't think it was because of the clothing allowance, but it probably didn't help. I sold all those clothes on eBay. Actually, I made a lot of money. Well, it felt like a lot of money at the time. I would say this is a really hard one, right? And I think the change begins with you. And it's hard to be the person who does things differently. And I will tell you, at my last job before the pandemic, I was absolutely that person who said, no, I'm actually not going to participate in this, and this is why. And I would talk very, very nicely to people about like environmental issues and stuff like that. And I like to think I had a little bit of an impact there. I would say if you are in a situation where you feel as if you need constant newness in terms of clothing for work, you should probably get yourself on a rental subscription, which is still not as sustainable as it sounds, but it is better than buying a whole lot of brand new clothes, right? So that's what I would put out there. Also, like, once again, depending on your size or your aesthetic, what you're looking for, secondhand is a really great option. I can't believe the stuff I see on Poshmark, for example, and it will save you a lot of money.
Thank you. And then I think you addressed this to a certain extent when you talked about a hope that, first off, sewing is a skill. I can embroider, I can't sew.
I love embroidery. Yeah.
But yeah, that bringing the garment workers out to industry or to a situation where they are more interacting directly with the people who are going to be consuming their products and charging more for their work. But the question that was asked is, if we stop our buying behavior, will it not hurt livelihoods for people across the value chain?
That is a great question, and something I think about a lot. Actually, we're talking about it in the next episode of Clotheshorse. But I will say, you know, everything has a lot of gray areas, right? And everything is complicated. I discussed this with my upcoming guest. I said, you know, what do you think of this? Like, are these good jobs? What happens if these jobs go away? And I think we can't limit ourselves to the only thing these people can do is sew clothes for us for cheap. And then if we take that away from them, they have nothing. First off, a lot of these people who are sewing for a living, that is not their dream job. It is not fulfilling. They didn't wake up, crawl out of the womb and say, I can't wait to sew t-shirts all day when I grow up, right? why can't we offer better? Why can't we offer more education and other kinds of jobs like teacher, doctor, blogger? I don't know, like all the things that ostensibly we have available to us right now. And so, yes, will it have an impact? For sure. But I will also tell you this. We think that to pay someone a living wage, we assume our clothing would have to be wildly more expensive. And ultimately, data has indicated that if we wanted to still have crappy clothes, and we're like, we're fine with the bad fabrics, the zippers, whatever, but we want to pay everyone a living wage, we would probably have to add 25 cents to the price we, the consumer, pay. I think that's worth it, right? Where it's going to get more expensive is if our clothes also are nicer and last longer and don't make us stinky and all the other things that come with
More
it. And we
pockets.
deserve that. Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah, all right. I wanted, a bunch of people mentioned in chat, and you mentioned a couple of times about visible mending. So this is my plug for the library. I know we have at least half a dozen books, because I think I was the person who bought books for that area for a while. And so I know the Barrington Library has books on visible mending. If Barrington isn't your home library and you can't get to us easily, go to your own library's catalog and just Google mending. And chances are good things will come up, because it is more common these days. And there are a lot of things out there about it. Jennifer, what were you going to say?
Well, and just to add on to that, I know our Go Green Barrington group hasn't managed to get it together, but I know my friend from Go Green Wilmette has mentioned she's putting on a repair cafe where you can come in and have things fixed. And that's usually not just clothing, but sometimes electrical things. Another thing that's starting to be a trend is a library of things. I know Chicago has a tool library where you might be able to get a sewing machine at your local library and use it just for a little while. But a lot of options that feed off your idea that there's books that'll teach us mending.
There are a lot of great YouTube videos too. I am personally the person who wants to learn from a book, but I know that's how I learned how to knit, is from a book. But I know others would like to see a video, and there is a lot of content out there. So choose your way, how you like to learn.
And I would go even beyond that. If the first YouTube video you watch doesn't work for you, try someone else's. People teach things differently. So find somebody who teaches the way that you learn well, or whose fingers are like yours.
Yes.
We are doing, March is National Craft Month. So it's not a sewing class per se, but my colleague Corinne is our senior services librarian, and she and I are doing a program on sewing a fidget quilt for people with dementia. And we'll have someone there who is an accomplished seamstress, because neither Corinne nor I are. And demonstrating a few things on a sewing machine for people. So something to think about. And we're going to be doing a BYOC, bring your own craft, once a month starting in March. So
fun.
Fourth Wednesdays. Yeah, that'll be coming in the next, you'll see it in the next program guide that comes out for February and March.
Great.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add that I think that for me, the most impactful part of my life in terms of getting into sustainable fashion, existing within that slow fashion community, sharing information there, has been the community of people who love making things, learning new things. I've found so many amazing friendships that way. And honestly, that is the best part of the whole thing. And it's way better than the best thing I've ever bought, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So as a wrap up, Sam, do you want to explain to people that they'll get a recording and the slides? And of course, we want to thank Amanda, because we've a million wonderful comments in the chat that echo those words, but it's been great to hear all your ideas.
Yeah, and I'll go along with Amanda's plug for listening to Clotheshorse. It's really enlightening and interesting, and I've learned a lot from it. So I recommend that highly. We appreciate it. I will get the video ready to go on the library's YouTube site as quickly as I can. I'm not going to promise tomorrow, but I'll try.
It takes some time.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't edit them much at all. So, but a little bit. And then I will send a copy of the slide deck right away. I can probably do that tonight to everyone who registered for the program. I will send a message out when the YouTube video goes live. So if any of you are looking forward to sharing it with friends and family members, you'll be able to do that. I'll let you know when it's there so that you can do that. So any other questions? You've gotten a lot of thank yous. I hope you're seeing them.
Yes, thank you, everyone. It's just so great to hang out with you, and I'm glad, it feels good to know that I made an impact on all of you. So thank you.
We did get one last, and I think you kind of addressed this, but are there any brands you recommend that produce high quality and sustainable?
Sure. So I do not tell people where to shop because I want to take the focus off of shopping. So if you were looking for some brands, I would recommend checking out Eco Stylist. They use a lot of data to recommend brands. You can also check out Good On You, which has an exhaustive rating system. And you can be even as granular as show me brands where I can buy socks for people with big feet. Okay, I don't know if it goes that far, but they break it up by bras and sweatsuits and dresses and all kinds of things. So definitely go check out Good On You, Eco Stylist. There's so many amazing resources out there, and they're actually linked in my deck.
Excellent.
And the history of my hat is that my husband made this for me for my birthday.
Oh, sweet. I love it. That's very fun.
All right. Well, thank you, Amanda, and thank you all for
Thanks,
tuning
everyone.
in, and we'll look forward to reading all those links.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. What a great evening. What a great way to end my day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.